Who is more powerful? A dwarven king in exile who led a company of dwarves to reclaim the Lonely Mountain from the dragon Smaug? Or one of the most loyal members of the Fellowship of the Ring? Join me today as we explore this question and analyze the history and key strengths of both Thorin Oakenshield and Gimli, son of Gloin. And by the end of this video, we will determine once and for all who is more powerful. My name is Gibby and welcome to my channel, Fact or Fantasy, where we discuss Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, analyzing characters, lore, and more every single week. If you've seen my videos before, then you might know that I have done a video like this comparing Gandalf to Galadriel, and it definitely got people talking. Since that video, one of the pairings that was most requested to do next was Thorin versus Gimli, as these two dwarves are definitely the strongest contenders out of their respective stories. In this video, I'll be diving into the three major categories of strength to determine who wins out in a battle to the death. Those categories are magical, mental, and physical strength, and ultimately the final decision will be up to you. Throughout each section, I'll be revealing the key moments from Thorin and Gimli's stories that best exemplify that area of strength. And by the end of this video, I want to hear from you on who you think gets the victory. So with that being said, let's dive into things by doing a brief overview of each character's history, and then we'll analyze their strengths. Thorin Oakenshield was born in the year 2746 of the Third Age. His father Thrain was the son of Thror, a direct descendant of Durin, and the king of Durin's folk. Thorin was raised in the prosperous dwarven kingdom of Erebor, also known as the Lonely Mountain, but at the very young age of 24, his life changed forever. Smaug the dragon was drawn to the vast riches of Erebor and attacked one day while Thorin was out adventuring in the woods with some other young dwarves. This led to the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain completely losing their homeland, causing them to become wanderers, surviving through hard labor as blacksmiths and miners. Eventually, they settled in Dunland, and years later, Thror went back to search the Misty Mountains, thinking to potentially reclaim them. Sadly, Thror was killed by the orc Azog, who had become the king of the orcs of Moria. Thror's death triggered the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, which lasted 7 years and culminated in the final battle of Azanulbazar, where Thorin fought and earned himself the nickname Oakenshield, as his shield broke and he used an oak branch to defend himself. Unlike the movie, however, Thorin did not face down Azog, and Dane Ironfoot was the one to kill the Orc King. After this war ended, Thorin and his father went to settle in the Blue Mountains, and after Thrain disappeared, Thorin officially became the king of Durin's folk. Years later, driven by the desire to reclaim their homeland, Thorin led a company of dwarves and Bilbo to the Lonely Mountain, and as many of you know, Thorin ultimately died there during the Battle of the Five Armies. There is much more to be said about Thorin's life, and I can't dive into the exact history today because that would probably take a whole video by itself. But I think that overview gives us enough context to go off of as we analyze his greatest feats. But first, despite it being well known to pretty much everyone who's watching this video, we need to take a look at the history of Gimli, son of Gloin. Gimli was born in 2879 of the Third Age and grew up in the Blue Mountains due to the relocation we just discussed in Thorin's history. However, following the re-establishment of Erebor in 2941, Gimli lived there until he went to Rivendell with his father Gloin in 3018. Something that a lot of fans don't know, though, is that they didn't go due to a specific summons from Elrond, but rather because they wanted to warn of a messenger of Mordor who was seeking news of Bilbo in the Ring. As we know, at the Council of Elrond, Gimli was the representative that the dwarves selected to go on the journey with Frodo, and he became one of the 9 members of the Fellowship of the Ring. Fighting through many battles, which we'll discuss in a bit, Gimli stuck with the company through thick and thin, and eventually survived the War of the Ring alongside his new bestie, Legolas. After the War of the Ring, Legolas and Gimli fulfilled their oaths to one another by visiting Fangorn together, as well as the glittering caves of Helm's Deep. Gimli then went back with a colony of dwarves and settled in those caves, becoming the Lord of the Glittering Caves. From there, his people performed great works by helping rebuild Middle-earth, specifically in Minas Tirith. At the end of his life, Gimli was allowed the honor of sailing to the Undying Lands with Legolas, being the only one of the dwarves to ever do so. And that is essentially the entire history of Gimli, son of Gloin. Now, before we get into the different categories of strengths and reveal Gimli and Thorin's Thorin's greatest moments, I wanted to say a big thank you to Jason, Cody, Joshua, and the rest of my incredible Patreon supporters. If you'd like to watch videos a week early, get access to patron-only live streams, and help out with behind-the-scenes content like titles and thumbnails, you can use the link in the description to join today. Anyway, that being said, let's jump into the 3 categories of magical, mental, and physical strength. First up is magical strength, and our 2 characters are quite evenly matched in this category. Not because Thorin and Gimli don't have magic, but because we don't really see them have unique magic. We can assume that they both possess magic which is inherent to their race, which means that they're on a level playing field. So real quick, let's cover what exactly that magic is. As we know, Tolkien's version of magical ability is quite subtle, and nothing like what we know from other franchises, such as Harry Potter. For example, when Pippin asks the elves of Lorien whether the cloaks they were given are magic, the elf replies by saying, "I do not know what you mean by that. They are fair garments, and the web is good, for it was made in this land. They are elvish robes certainly, if that is what you mean, leaf and branch, water and stone. They have the hue and beauty of all these things under the twilight of Lorien that we love. For we put the thought of all that we love into all that we make. They are light to wear and warm enough or cool enough at need, and you will find them a great aid in keeping out of the sight of unfriendly eyes, whether you walk among the stones or the trees." This tells us a great deal about what magic is like in Middle-earth. Odds are that what is magical to outsiders is just normal everyday life to the race with the magical abilities. However, that being said, dwarves have some of the most obvious magic in Middle-earth. We know from Tolkien's writings that dwarves were able to make doors that cannot be seen by others, or only seen during specific times of the year. We know that they can also use runes of power to strengthen things, and they also can use spells to hide treasure, as the dwarves of Thorin's company do so after finding loot in the troll cave during The Hobbit. But again, our key characters today don't showcase any of these specific abilities, and even if they did, I'm not sure it would contribute to their overall power ranking. So unlike the episode on Galadriel and Gandalf, which was very magic heavy, this category today gets a pass. I think we'll find most of Thorin and Gimli's strengths inside the other 2 sections. And speaking of which, let's move into category number 2 and analyze their mental strength. Starting with Thorin, we immediately have a ranking that is more than meets the eye. While some might be able to quickly score Thorin's mental strength, for better or for worse, it's not as easy as it seems. You see, while Thorin has many positive qualities and specific examples which boost what I would consider his mental strength, he has one major downside that I'll cover last. So starting with his positive traits, I believe one of Thorin's strongest qualities is his resilience. This is natural to dwarves, but Thorin specifically has been through a lot. At the age of 24, which for dwarves is like being a toddler, Thorin witnessed his home go up in flames, and presumably thousands of his people die, including friends and family. When Smaug attacked, Thorin wasn't home and had to watch from afar, able to do nothing. He also thought his grandfather and father were dead until they randomly came out of the woods. He later learned in The Hobbit that this was because of the secret door. After being forcefully exiled from his homeland along with his people, Thorin grew up terribly poor, and they had little to their name for quite some time. On top of these moments, we have a smaller example which shows Thorin's resilience, and that is the fact that he and the other dwarves of his company spent nearly 2 months in a Mirkwood prison before Bilbo freed them. And I don't know about you, but I think that requires a good deal of mental fortitude. Another trait that I would put under the umbrella of mental strength is Thorin's leadership. As we know, he became king after his grandfather passed and his father disappeared. And despite them having lost their original home of Erebor, they had resettled in the Blue Mountains and grown quite the colony there. It wasn't like Thorin had no one to rule. When he had decided to go on a quest to reclaim the Lonely Mountain, he had a decent-sized kingdom to rule already. This obviously would have required a great deal of leadership. Plus, another example of leadership would of course be him taking a group of dwarves and Bilbo to go reclaim the Lonely Mountain. Now, besides those strengths for Thorin here in the mental category, we need to address the elephant, or should I say dragon, in the room. There is one major negative point going against Thorin here, and that is the fact that upon reaching Erebor, he fell to dragon sickness. This sickness obviously doesn't affect everyone, but it sort of runs in his family, and when comparing it to Gimli, who had the temptation of the ring, it doesn't make Thorin look too good here. That is why even after the positives I listed, I have to give Thorin a 7 out of 10 in the mental strength category. I know that might be controversial, so let me know your score for him in the comments below. But now moving on to Gimli, we've got quite a bit to cover, as his exploits throughout the War of the Ring are well documented. Like Thorin, he has his own brand of toughness, but where Thorin wavers, Gimli only seems to grow stronger the longer the journey goes on. So let's break down what makes Gimli such a powerhouse in this category. First off, I think the most impressive display of Gimli's mental strength is his resistance to the One Ring. Now keep in mind, this is the most powerful corrupting object in all of Middle-earth. Way worse than dragon sickness. Even our beloved Boromir couldn't resist it. Thorin, as we discussed, fell to dragon sickness. But how did Gimli react to the ring? Well, he never once expresses interest in claiming the ring for himself, and that level of mental fortitude is not something that should be glossed over. Another key trait underneath our mental strength category is loyalty, which honestly is unmatched when it comes to Gimli. Even when Elrond makes it clear that none of the Fellowship are obligated to follow Frodo to the end, Gimli responds instantly by saying, "Faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens." And these aren't empty words. After all, we witness Gimli stick with his new friends through some pretty sketchy situations, including the Paths of the Dead. That is a great example of his mental strength right there, by the way, as the Paths of the Dead are pretty much known for making people go insane. Now, something that often gets overlooked regarding Gimli is his actions after the War of the Ring. While he did quite a bit during the journey with the Fellowship, and we'll touch on that during the next category of physical strength, Gimli also showed leadership during the rebuilding of Middle-earth. I think a lot of people tend to look at Gimli as a great dwarf, but never royalty or really a leader. He's a great friend and an even better follower, as he shows when he follows Aragorn almost anywhere. But after the War of the Ring, he actually did become a leader, as he took a group of dwarves and started a colony in the glittering caves behind Helm's Deep. That's right, after that, he was known as Gimli, Lord of the Glittering Caves. It's kind of funny to think of Gimli as a ruler, but honestly, he earned it. Anyway, in the aftermath of Sauron, he didn't huddle up in the caves, but he took his people out and helped rebuild Middle-earth. Specifically, he helped Aragorn in Minas Tirith, and most notably rebuilt the gates of the city using steel and mithril. If you remember, the Witch King had destroyed the gates during the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. So when it comes to mental strength, Thorin doesn't actually have the upper hand in terms of leadership, because post-Lord of the Rings, Gimli shows incredible leadership skills as well, and therefore I can't give Gimli anything lower than a 9 out of 10. But as always, let me know in the comments what you score him. Now with that section completed, we can move on to our final category of physical strength. And starting with Thorin, we have 5 specific examples to cover in order to decide on a ranking for our King Under the Mountain. Going in chronological order, we of course have to start by addressing the Battle of Azan-Obazar. This was the final battle the dwarves had with the orcs, and this is the same battle in which Dain slew the great orc Azog. Thorin isn't written about in detail here, but we know that he got his name Oakenshield because of his shield breaking, and him then picking up an oak branch to defend himself. He was injured in this fight due to the shield breaking, and his brother Frerin was killed in this battle. Ultimately, we know that during the 7-Year War, Thorin must have fought multiple times, and he always survived, which shows that he is skilled in combat. But of course, in this final battle, he gets bonus points for the whole Oakenshield thing. Next, we have to mention his encounter with the 3 trolls during the quest for Erebor. Out of all the dwarves, Thorin is the only one that really puts up a fight. In the book, the trolls hid and snatched up the dwarves one by one as they came into the clearing by the fire. But Thorin was smarter than that and taunted the trolls, and then fought them before being captured. He even poked one of the trolls in the eye with a flaming branch. So although he was captured eventually, we at least know that he showed more physical ability than any of the other dwarves. The third example I wanted to mention would be the dwarves' time in the Misty Mountains when they were captured by goblins. Of course, Gandalf plays a huge role in this, but it must be mentioned that Thorin and the other dwarves fought their way out of the mountain even against such overwhelming odds. Fourth, simply put, Thorin and the other dwarves survive a warg attack. Not much fighting happens here, but hey, you gotta have physical strength to climb those trees, am I right? And finally, our 5th example, and perhaps the most important one, is Thorin's charge during the Battle of the 5 Armies. This charge not only shows his physical strength, but his bravery and leadership as well, as he overcomes the dragon sickness. Now this is kind of a weird example because he also dies in this battle, so should we be proud of this Thorin moment? Ultimately, I think so, and after adding up each of these physical feats, I give Thorin an 8.5 out of 10 for physical strength. And now we can finish off by analyzing Gimli, who has 7 feats of strength that I want to discuss. And because there are 7, I'm going to try to get through these without taking forever. First up, we have another warg attack, but this one ranks a bit higher than Thorin's encounter. Why? Well, the Fellowship actually fights these wargs instead of climbing in the trees. Granted, they were armed, but still, Gimli fought well, even getting a mention from Tolkien, who writes that, quote, he fought the beast stoutly with his axe. This attack happened before they decided to go through Moria in the book, and ends with Gandalf essentially sending lightning down on the creatures. But before that climactic finish, Gimli did his thing. Second, we have to address their time inside Moria itself. While in the Chamber of Mazarbul, Gimli was the star of the show. Maybe it was because of the fact that he was inside a dwarven kingdom, or because he was defending Balin's tomb, but Gimli fought fiercer than ever. We read that he hewed the legs from under an orc who jumped on Balin's tomb, and that Gimli remained fighting on top of the tomb until Legolas literally dragged him away. Third, Gimli fought at Amon Hen alongside Legolas as they searched for Frodo. We don't know too many details about this because the chapter is written from Aragorn's perspective, and he was separate from them. But when Aragorn meets up with them, we read that the ground was littered with orcs and Uruk-hai. So Legolas and Gimli definitely put in some work. Fourth, this one isn't so much fighting, but an example of physical endurance. And that is Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli's journey across Rohan as they track down Merry and Pippin. They essentially run non-stop for multiple days, crossing 45 leagues. That is no easy task, especially for a dwarf. Fifth, we of course have Helm's Deep. This is an iconic fight, and you might think you know it all, but there's more to this battle than meets the eye. In the book, Gimli and Éomer retreat into the caves, and are only saved once Erkenbrand arrives with Gandalf. Gimli also has a head injury from this fight. Now I know you might be thinking that a retreat and an injury would count against the dwarf in terms of strength, but here's how he made up for it. First, earlier in the fight, Gimli actually saves Éomer's life. And second, as we all know, Gimli wins the game with Legolas of counting how many foes they could slay. So I think those two things make up for his previous losses. At number 6, Gimli fought in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, bringing reinforcements to the fight along with Aragorn and Legolas. This battle was one of the most difficult, with a lot of good men dying. Tolkien makes a point of saying that Aragorn and Éomer were two of the only ones who came back unscathed, and of course, Legolas and Gimli did as well. And finally, the 7th example of Gimli's physical strength comes at the end of the story, during the last battle at the Black Gate, when all hope seems lost. As always, he fights well and survives, but more than that, he actually saves Pippin's life. Pippin had stabbed a troll early on in the fight, causing it to fall on his body. Later, after Sauron's destruction, Gimli saw a hobbit foot sticking out from under a troll body on the battlefield, and he single-handedly lifted the troll off of the hobbit, freeing him and saving his life. Now that is a feat of strength. Before I reveal his final score, I wanted to give some honorable mentions to moments I didn't include in today's analysis, as they don't directly count to any scoring for me, but they're fun to mention. First, Beorn carried Thorin's body off of the battlefield, which is pretty cool considering how much Beorn disliked dwarves. It just goes to show how well respected Thorin was. As for Gimli, he receives 3 strands of hair from Galadriel, and is so honored by her that it is likely due to her influence that Gimli was invited to sail to the Undying Lands, being the only dwarf to have ever done so. And finally, Gimli took the Book of Mazarbul from the tomb of Balin and carried it with him during the entire rest of the journey so that he could deliver it to Dain at Erebor, which is pretty insane to think about. Anyway, with all of those examples tallied, Gimli's physical strength score comes in at a resounding 9.5 out of 10. Maybe that's generous, but I think Gimli is one of the strongest dwarves we see in Middle-earth. And with this score, I am officially making the claim that Gimli would win out in a fight against Thorin, and I believe him to be the strongest of the two. If you think you have a good contender to face Gimli in another episode of Who's More Powerful, let me know in the comments. Also, drop your own scores and thoughts below, and recommend pairings of other characters from The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter that you think I should do next. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and check out the first episode of the series, which is Galadriel vs. Gandalf, if you haven't already. Plus, take a look at my other series, Movies vs. Manuscripts, in which I compare the Tolkien books to their film adaptations, and find all the differences. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.